for the club. So the first step is setting up an iClicker account is to go to iClicker.com. And then if you do not have an account, click on create an account as an instructor. And once you have an instructor account, that can also be used as a student account. And instructors' accounts do not have any cost to the college. So by doing it this way, you also have a student account, which also doesn't cost the college anything. But student accounts cost the college $4 per semester per student. But that's for any number of classes the students are registered in. So it's $4 whether they use it in one course or whether they use it in 5 or 6 courses in a given semester. So I'm not going to be able to create an account, but we could go through the steps. So are you on this page now?
No, because I'm
Okay.
still trying to connect to that, reconnect it. There we go.
Yeah, just go to iClicker.com and choose create an account. And then once you're there, it asks you for your find an institution. Just put Oswego in, and it should come up with SUNY College at Oswego.
Mhm.
And then you fill out the rest of it. I'm not going to do all of it, but most disciplines are listed. If your discipline is not listed, you could always choose other, which captures anything else.
Mhm.
And then you put in your first name, your last name, your email. You pick a password, one that you're going to remember. You type it again as is common. The remote ID is only going to matter if you're going to use physical clickers, which probably doesn't apply to many people any longer. And then you have to agree to the privacy notice and terms or it won't create the account. And then create the account. Now, if you already have the student account, it may tell you an account has already been created in this name with this email address. But instructors use the same email address and password as both an instructor and a student. But normally you create the instructor one first, and then the student one is derived from that.
So we don't need a remote ID.
You don't. That's only if you use those physical clickers. There's some in the cabinet at the end,
Okay.
which, I don't think we've really,
Okay.
many people have used since COVID.
Okay. So I got this email is already registered. Please try another email or sign in with your existing account, which would be a student account.
So one of the things that happens then is, I'm going to go and what you can try doing is, oops, that's not what I want. iClicker.com, and I'm going to try signing in,
Oh,
and it's going to remind me I'm an instructor. So you could try that,
okay.
and then, well, it saved mine,
Uh-huh.
but one of the options is you could always click forgot password. And then that would let you set the password. It would send you an email. You can log in, reset it, set up a new password, and then that would work as your instructor account,
Okay.
or it should.
So if I'm signing in, and I have a student account, should I try to sign in as an instructor or a student?
Try it as an instructor, because to be able to set up the course, you have to be in the instructor role.
Okay. Oh, wait.
But you use the same credentials in both situations. I've never gone from the instructor to a student one though, so I'm not sure quite how that will work.
Okay. I think I'm in.
You're in?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay. So once you're in, what you would do, I'm going to sign in now. And this is what happens when you come back in. You just sign in and we're going to create a new course. And this one you could set up with one of your old courses
Okay.
to work through it. Now, there's two ways of doing it. It could be a full course or attendance only. If you're going to do attendance only, you don't really need clickers, but I know we have at least one person who does this. But pretty much everyone else does it as a full course. Basically, if you choose attendance only, students click in on the class with their mobile device, and that's all. It's just saying, yes, I'm here, but there's no polling or any of the other useful reasons for doing this. So select full course. It automatically remembers your institution. Pick a discipline for the course. And I'm going to say this is principles. I'll set it up for my fall course of microeconomics. The start date will be, I'm just guessing, it's going to be sometime in August. You can always change this later, but I'm guessing it's probably going to be, is it this week? Probably later than that. It's probably, is it the 26th? I don't know.
Oh, well, yes, that's when we start
Classes start?
yes.
Okay, so it's going to begin
Yeah.
then, and it's going to end sometime in December. I'm going to say December 20th. It's probably before then, but it doesn't do any harm. Now here, students can search for and self-enroll. I guess that's true. With the integration, it kind of sends them a reminder. Let me see. This is something a bit new. Okay, we're going to invite students to your course via the LTI grade sync. So in this case, you don't need to, this is a new feature in the setup. It was not there when I last did this in January. Okay, so let's go back. So students must be invited to the course, and that comes from the Brightspace registry. And now you can set up a course ID, and here I'm going to use Echo 101 section 800. And for the term, I'm going to say fall, except this will be 2024 because it just has the most recent ones there. Now, my class, you don't have to put this in, but if students see a bunch of classes listed, putting it in makes it more likely they'll choose the right section. Mine is going to be meeting from 2:20 on Tuesday, Thursday. Not AM though, fortunately. So I should toggle that to PM. Oops, with a capital P.
Mhm.
And take the cap lock off. And, oh, come on. Shift P. There we go. Okay, and Thursday is also, let me see if I can do both. No. So just set it to, you can just step up, but or you can just type it in. I thought it was going to be easier typing it, but I'm fumbling. And then PM. Okay, so that's when my class meets. So I'm going to create this course. So now it will be discoverable through Brightspace and so forth. Okay, so I'm going to take this course and click on it. And I am now going to go to the settings for the course, where this defines all the characteristics of it. Oh, I didn't put in the course discipline. So this is economics. Okay, so now you get to this menu, and there's a bunch of things that you can set up. The first is going to be the type of devices that you will use. And I am going to use mobile devices only. You could still have students use physical clickers, but then they have to pay for them, and you're not able to use any of the free response, the mapping, the hotspot, or any of the other types of questions. So
I don't get that menu like when I click on the course. So let me.
Well, it bumped me out and brought me back.
Oh.
So I think you had to save it. Oh, right. And then go on settings on the left side menu. And then it should bring you back. And then you should get all
Okay.
the settings.
Okay,
The bottom
Devices.
left, I think.
I got it.
Okay. So of course, details are the same that you set up, but now you choose what devices. You could do the time out of focus, but it tells you how much of the time students were away. But if you want them to do some calculations, they might leave focus to use a calculator function on their phone. You can do that, but you could try it if you want, but I generally leave it off. Now, attendance, you could set it up to auto run attendance. You could set it up so it will highlight students who have a certain number of unexcused absences. You could do auto run attendance during some time during a class. I don't do that. But it will keep track of whether they participate in that day's quiz, and this just flags them for you so you can see who's missed 3 or more classes. And you can change that to 4 or 5 or whatever you like. It doesn't affect their grade in any way, but it's just a reminder to them that they've missed some classes and so on. You could require them to physically be in the location of the class for attendance. That the geo fencing doesn't necessarily work very well. I generally don't require that. And if you have a student who's legitimately out sick and you're bringing them in through Zoom, that would I would consider that still to be attendance. Okay, so then the next thing is the polling. Now, this is what's shared to the app, whether it's a web app or whether it's on their phones. Basically, what happens when you use iClicker is it will capture whatever is on the screen that is being used for the display of the questions. You put the questions typically in PowerPoint or Google Slides or just on your screen, and then you activate the question. When you automatically share a picture of the screen to student devices when polling starts, it will show them the question both on the screen they're facing or on the Zoom screen if they're coming in over Zoom and on their device. If you're concerned about students joining the poll without being present in class or on Zoom, what many people do is they will say to not send a picture of the screen, especially if you're going to do two. I'll try this. I usually just send it anyway, but basically this is whether students are seeing the question on their phone as well as on the screen where that's being displayed. I usually leave it on simply because if a student is participating over Zoom remotely, they're watching the class on Zoom, and then they have to switch from one app to the other and have them go back and forth between the question screen and the responses. Just seem a bit too much, although that only affects students who are coming in on Zoom because the other students could see it right in the classroom. And then I always send the results. I don't send the results. We discuss the results and I share them because a common practice is to ask questions twice, to first poll the students, let them answer individually, then let them discuss it, and then poll them again. And if you automatically send the results when polling ends, they'd see what the vote breakdown was after the first poll, which defeats the purpose of them discussing it. Because if they see that 70% of the students pick one response, they'll just pick that in the second time without really processing it. So I generally don't send the results, but I do share the results after the second round when that's used. Now, here tells you how you measure participation. You can have scores that are based on whether or not they answer questions, whether they participate, regardless of what their answers are, or you can have questions that are tied to questions being correct or incorrect. If you only want students to get credit based on whether they participated in the poll, which is basically they're present and doing something with this, you could earn a certain number of participation points under any of these conditions. If they answer everything, if they answer all except for one, if they answer at least 3/4, at least half, or even if they just answer one question, if you want to give them participation points, you pick that and then you assign the number of points. And this would be per class session. So I generally do it based on questions rather than that. But again, some instructors only give participation points. most of the questions I ask are ones where in an economics class, there are some right answers. And if they're not, I'll make it anonymous and just do a poll where they're not getting points for that, but they are getting points for ones where there is a correct answer. And then if you do give questions based on whether people get it correct or not, a really common thing is to give, since you try to give questions that are going to be challenging for everyone, a really common practice is to give some points for responding and then additional points for responding correctly. So what I normally do is I give 3 points for a response, 5 points for a correct response. So even if they answer everything wrong, for that day, they're getting 60%. They answer half of them right and half of them wrong, which is what you'd expect on average. If you have questions that half the students will get correct, on average, they'd get an 80 for that day by just participating. You could set a total polling session where the points are split among any number of questions, or it could be based on some days you might ask 2 questions, some days you might ask 15 questions. The question is, do you want to provide a fixed number of points for each day and then have it be a percentage of that? Or do you want it to be based on how many questions you ask that day? Either way, you can still choose to treat each day as being an equal percentage of the score. I usually don't score the total polling session, but I treat each grade percentage score as an equal weight in the overall polling average. So, if they get 100% or an 80%, that's treated the same, whether it's out of 10 questions or out of 5 questions or whatever. It doesn't matter that much which you choose, depending on the setup. Now, when you do a poll question, you can either count up and manually shut it down by clicking on the stop button. I usually do a countdown, and normally at the beginning of the class, at least, I'll do 1 minute and 30 seconds per question. And okay, I guess apparently I have to click the up arrow to do that. There we go. You can set that however long you want, but I normally will do this countdown because it just reminds students of how long they have. I give them time to think about the question before I start the polling, depending on how complex the question is. If it's just a simple recall type thing, you don't need to give them much time, but and apparently this changed. So I'm going to change, oops. I'm going to set it to 1 minute and 30 seconds again and leave it there. There we go.
Can you scroll up for a minute? I'm
Sure.
going to see how you had the session participation.
I generally don't.
Oh, 0. Okay.
You can do it however you want. You can have half the weight be from, you could give them a certain number of points just for being there, and then a certain number for correct points. I'm more concerned with whether they're actually getting things correct than whether they're just physically there. But again, they're guaranteed getting 60%, even if they answer every single question wrong, and some people will do 50%. They might do 1 and 1. So you get 1 point for answering, 2 points for answering correctly. But if you ask challenging questions, giving more points for just responding provides a better, you don't want this, you want this to be something where people take some rest, where the questions are challenging, where they're stretching themselves. And then because you often involve some type of peer discussion, that tends to improve, the second time they answer it, they tend to do better because they've had a chance to talk it over with their peers. But again, that's something you can settle on. I know in some instructors in some departments, they only base it on session participation. And if you have questions where there are no correct answers, where it's really a question of your initial viewpoints, your ending viewpoints, or what you value most, more, then there are no clear correct answers, and you may just want to assign participation points. So it depends on what types of questions you're asking, the discipline, and your context.
Okay.
Okay, and then we're going to go on to the next part, which is quizzing. I tend not to use the quizzing option. This is where you have a standalone quiz where instead of doing the poll in real time in class, students can take it asynchronously. So they can come in, they see the questions and they answer them one by one, which some people use for remote classes if they're teaching asynchronous courses. On the other hand, there's better quiz options built into Brightspace if you have classes, students who are fully online, but it is an option you can use for students who are not, who are not there in real time. And, the weights are still the same, but I tend not to do that, just because if I'm teaching an asynchronous course, I'll use the Brightspace tools. If I'm teaching an in-person class, if they're taking it synchronously, whether they're in person or, online, they can still answer in real time. So this will, well, let's save it just to this point. Oh, okay. I didn't realize it bumped me all the way back to that. But so the next step is integrating it with your course. And this is where the slightly more challenging part is. So what happens basically, you can connect to Brightspace, and I'm giving it permission to connect to Brightspace. And then it's going to bring me into the Brightspace login. There we go. And it will list all of my classes. I'm going to take unpublished because this is a fall class and my fall classes are not yet published because students aren't quite there yet. And my content isn't fully there yet. In fact, I just copied it over from last year's course right before the session started. But this is a section I'm going to copy it to. So you select, if it's a class that's active, you could just click publish. If it's a class that's not yet active, at the very top, you get that option of published or unpublished. So I chose unpublished, and you could type in the course name, or you could just scroll down. We don't have that many yet. There will be more though. Each year, the number will pile up. So I'm going to now connect to that. And right now I have 22 students in that class.
For this fall?
Yeah, I guess a lot of freshmen haven't registered yet.
Yeah, the advisors are working on first
Okay.
year student schedules.
Because the smallest number I've ever had is 250, I think,
Mhm.
and the largest is 420, which is room
Yeah.
capacity. So I'm going to click that, and now this will connect it to all of those 22 students. And the next thing you can do is sync the roster. It's not going to take very long to sync this roster. And interesting, 12 students of the 22 need to connect to the class, which means 10 of them already have an iClicker account, which means they're probably upper level students. So probably these are sophomores who are retaking it or who are taking it for the first time, not as freshmen. Most students in the class tend to be freshmen. I'm not going to view the details, especially where I said where they're retaking it. So we will close this, but this will basically put all the students into the course. And there we go. And now the next part is, how do you want to bring the scores in? There's two options. You can either bring one grade for the whole semester in which case students will just see their aggregate grade, or what you can do is create individual grades where it's one grade for each day. Personally, I prefer that because then it's pretty easy for me to look at how many days a student was there and missed, and if they have a 60% in the class, is it because they were there every day and only getting every single question wrong, or is it because they were getting everything right but they missed 40% of the classes? So this way they get one column and it's marked by class one, class two, or something like that. And it will have as a subtitle for the grade the date of the score. So I create them into separate columns, which works nicely. And then the question is, if there's no iClicker response, I just assign a grade of 0 because it's a whole lot easier to do that automatically than it is to go back and zero fill them when you have sometimes hundreds of students. And sometimes what will happen is students we've had a problem for the last 2 years now with students transferring from one institution to another. Because the way our Brightspace multi-tenant instance is set up, the email they have is wherever they first entered the SUNY domain. So if they were in high school and they took a course at a community college or a four-year college, their email address will be linked to that institution and not ours, unless they send a ticket to the SUNY help desk to tell them to change it. And what will happen is those students will not show up in iClicker until that's corrected. And there was one student I had to remind of that all through the semester. But even though they would come in with 0 scores every day, as soon as they register and you resync the grades, it will bring it up to date, because the iCloud information is tied to their account. But if they don't have the Oswego email address connected, they will end up not being in there. And also their emails will be going to, on the course announcements, will be going to the email at whatever institution they had been at the previous semester or year. And that's a real pain, which was created by the way this was set up. And they're working on some possible solutions, but they haven't gotten it yet. But assigning a score of 0 and students who haven't registered yet will just, those grades will be replaced as long as you update the scores later. And basically, now I can click save and it's all set up for use in the fall. And then when you actually start running iClicker classes, it will show you a grade book of how they're doing. You can look at it here. Students will have access to this through their iClicker account. And basically they can see their grades at any time. You can see their grades and they'll be synced with Brightspace. Now, when you set it up for individual columns, you still have to create a gradebook category for iClicker scores. I usually just call it iClicker polling or iClicker polling scores as a category. And then each time you upload a grade, you have to go into the gradebook in the manage grade features. And I can't do it now because it will only happen when students have taken their first iClicker poll. But what will happen is you go in and you manage grades, scroll down to that. It will say, if your gradebook is set up correctly, it will say there's an error that now 110% of the grade is being specified. And then you go down and you reset. If these are 10% of the scores, you have to go down, edit that day's entry in the gradebook and assign it to the category where you store your iClicker scores. And then the scores will add up to 100% if you're using a percent-based grading system, which is the most common. Otherwise, it just becomes a new column in a gradebook and the default weight will be assigned to each of those. So if you forget about doing that 2 days, it'll be 120%. But all you have to do is go in and reset it to the correct value, and then it's fine. And that's kind of it. Any questions? We went through that pretty quickly.
Is this something that the extended learning Zoom office hours can help with? Do you know?
In what sense?
Well, like if I wanted to integrate it to a different Brightspace course, but I forgot how to do it.
No, they don't. I don't think any of them have worked with us before. So
Okay.
I generally support it.
Okay.
And yeah, you just come down to the office and I could help you get it
Okay.
set up.
All right, cool.
And generally there's 10 or 12 people at the start of each semester who I help set it up because they've forgotten.
Okay.
And we will also be saving this video. And let me stop the video. And now, because we've gone through the whole process now. And let me stop the recording. And basically this will be posted too, so that